For years, the name Jeffrey Epstein appeared only at the edges of public awareness, mentioned quietly in court documents, whispered about in financial circles, or buried in sealed filings that few ever read. According to records, his rise from relative obscurity to extraordinary wealth happened with unusual speed, aided by connections that seemed to open doors normally closed to outsiders. Reports suggest that by the late 1990s, Epstein had access to private jets, multiple luxury residences, and social circles that included politicians, academics, royalty, and powerful business figures. How these connections formed and what they were built upon remains one of the central questions hidden inside the Epstein files. Documents indicate that Epstein presented himself as a financier, though public records show limited evidence of traditional investment activity on a scale that would explain his fortune. According to financial filings and investigative reporting, his income sources were opaque, structured through trusts, shell companies, and offshore accounts. This lack of clarity raised early concerns among regulators and journalists, but for years, those concerns failed to gain traction. The system appeared to look the other way, or perhaps it was never encouraged to look closely at all. As Epstein's social influence expanded, so did the rumors surrounding him. Court records from civil cases suggest a pattern of behavior that drew the attention of law enforcement as early as the mid-1990s, yet investigations stalled, evidence went missing, and potential witnesses remained silent. According to former officials, pressure from unknown sources often complicated efforts to pursue the case fully. The files show repeated delays, jurisdictional confusion, and decisions that favored discretion over exposure. One of the most disturbing aspects revealed in the Epstein files is not a single event, but a pattern. Reports suggest that complaints were made, withdrawn, or quietly settled. Documents indicate that non-disclosure agreements became common, legally binding silence in exchange for financial compensation. These agreements, according to legal experts, are often used to protect privacy, but in this context they appear repeatedly in cases involving alleged abuse. Each agreement closed a door, sealing off testimony that might have clarified what truly occurred behind closed gates and guarded properties. According to flight logs entered into evidence, Epstein traveled extensively, often accompanied by guests whose names later appeared in media reports. These logs, while not proof of wrongdoing, raise questions about proximity and access. Investigators note that travel records establish who was present and when, but not what took place. The files contain lists of names, redacted passages, and annotations that hint at deeper connections without ever fully explaining them. Epstein's private island became a focal point of later investigations. According to property records and witness statements, the island was designed for privacy, with limited visibility from the outside world. Security measures were reportedly strict and access tightly controlled. Survivors later described the location as isolated, cut off from outside help, and structured to maintain secrecy. Documents suggest that the island functioned as more than a residence. It was a controlled environment where power dynamics were sharply defined. In 2008, the case reached a turning point that still echoes through the files. According to court documents, Epstein entered into a non-prosecution agreement that resolved federal charges while limiting his exposure to further investigation. The terms of this agreement, later unsealed, shocked legal observers. Reports indicate that it granted immunity not only to Epstein, but also to unnamed associates. The identities of those associates remain one of the most contested and obscured elements in the entire record. Legal analysts reviewing the agreement described it as unusually lenient. According to sentencing records, Epstein served limited jail time under conditions that allowed him to leave custody for extended periods. Public reaction at the time was muted, in part because the details were not widely reported. The files show that key documents were sealed, press coverage was minimal, and the broader implications of the agreement remained largely unnoticed by the public. For years after the deal, Epstein returned to his previous lifestyle. According to records, he continued traveling, hosting guests, and maintaining his network of influence. This continuation raises a critical question found throughout the Epstein files. How was such a return to normalcy possible after serious allegations had been formally acknowledged by the justice system? Reports suggest that institutional failures combined with legal maneuvering created a shield that protected him from further scrutiny. The silence surrounding the case began to crack only years later, when investigative journalists revisited sealed records and interviewed survivors willing to speak publicly. According to those reports, patterns emerged that connected earlier complaints with later testimonies. Names, dates, and locations began to align. The files show a growing body of evidence that suggested the story was far larger than previously understood. As attention returned, law enforcement reopened investigations. According to indictments, new charges were filed based on evidence that had either been overlooked or newly uncovered. The Epstein files from this period show a renewed urgency, but also reveal how much time had been lost. Witness memories had faded, records had been destroyed, and some potential sources of information were no longer alive. Epstein's arrest marked another dramatic shift. According to official statements, he was taken into custody on federal charges related to sex trafficking. The language used in these filings emphasized networks, recruitment, and exploitation. Yet even at this stage, documents remained carefully worded, avoiding direct reference to powerful individuals who might have been connected through association rather than action. While Epstein was held in custody, questions intensified around who else might be implicated. According to court filings, prosecutors acknowledged that the investigation was ongoing and potentially expansive. The files from this time include references to digital evidence, financial records, and communication logs. Each reference suggested additional layers of complexity, pointing toward a structure that extended beyond one individual. Then came Epstein's death in custody. According to official reports, it was ruled a suicide, but the circumstances immediately fueled skepticism. The Epstein files related to his final days include conflicting accounts of security procedures, malfunctioning cameras, and staffing irregularities. Investigations into these failures acknowledge serious lapses, but stop short of assigning intent. The impact of his death on the broader investigation was immediate. According to legal experts, it effectively ended the criminal case against him, though civil cases continued. Many saw this as the closing of a door that might never reopen. The files reflect a sense of unfinished business, with unanswered questions multiplying rather than diminishing. Civil lawsuits filed after his death brought additional details into the public record. According to depositions and sworn statements, survivors described recruitment methods, grooming behaviors, and systems of control. These accounts, while deeply personal, also showed consistency across time and geography. The files reveal patterns that suggest coordination rather than coincidence. Attention also turned to Epstein's associates. According to court records, some individuals were named, others referred to anonymously, and many mentioned only in redacted form. Legal standards required proof of direct involvement, and association alone was not sufficient for charges. This distinction, while legally necessary, left the public with lists of names and no clear conclusions. Financial records uncovered during estate proceedings added another layer. According to forensic accountants, money moved through Epstein's network in ways that obscured its origins and destinations. Trusts were dissolved, assets frozen, and claims filed. The files suggest that following the money raised as many questions as it answered. International elements further complicated the picture. According to travel documents and foreign property records, Epstein's activities crossed borders regularly. Jurisdictional limitations meant that some potential evidence remained outside the reach of U.S. investigators. Cooperation between countries was uneven, and legal standards varied. Throughout the Epstein files, one theme appears repeatedly: silence. Silence from institutions, silence from witnesses bound by agreements, and silence from records that were sealed or destroyed. This silence was not accidental. According to experts, it was structured, enforced, and maintained through legal, financial, and social mechanisms. The role of power cannot be ignored. Reports suggest that Epstein's access to influential figures created an environment where challenging him carried risks. Careers, reputations, and institutions all had incentives to avoid scrutiny. The files show how influence can shape outcomes without leaving explicit fingerprints. Media coverage evolved over time, shifting from sparse reporting to sustained investigation. According to journalists who revisited the case, earlier failures were partly due to legal threats and lack of documentation. Later breakthroughs came from persistence, collaboration, and the gradual unsealing of records. Despite these efforts, much remains hidden. The Epstein files include redactions whose justifications are still debated. National security, privacy concerns, and ongoing litigation have all been cited as reasons to withhold information. Each redaction represents a boundary the public cannot cross. As years pass, the case continues to cast a shadow. According to sociologists, it has become a symbol of systemic failure, illustrating how wealth and influence can distort justice. The files do not provide simple answers, but they offer a map of how complexity can be used as a shield. The unanswered questions are perhaps the most enduring legacy. Who knew what, and when? How many opportunities existed to intervene earlier? Which decisions were errors, and which were deliberate? The Epstein files do not resolve these questions, they preserve them. What remains is a record fragmented by time, law, and power. According to those who have studied it closely, the Epstein files are less a conclusion than a warning. They show how secrecy can thrive in plain sight, how silence can be enforced without overt coercion, and how truth can be delayed without ever being fully erased. In the end, the dark truth hidden in these files may not rest in any single document or name. It lies in the patterns, the gaps, and the systems that allowed those gaps to exist. And as long as parts of the record remain sealed, the full story remains incomplete, suspended between what is known and what may never be revealed.